into our discussion. We're all online now, and going to go into our topic of the Rambam. Today we're going to talk about Rambam as a pioneer in Jewish law, and then next session will be about Rambam as a pioneer in philosophy, not just Jewish, but general philosophy. And then after that, the following week, Thursday, the 25th, is Purim in the evening. So I sent emails on the email I sent out. I said, please volunteer. If you know how to tell a punchline, I'll volunteer, send me an email. I'll send you a joke. We'll incorporate it. You can then read it for us rather than me reading the whole thing all the way through. All right, so I have a little breakup. So we'll do a piece of Megillah reading, a piece of humor, a little bit of music, Megillah reading, humor, music. So that'll be our Purim. Then the Shabbat after that is Shushan Purim, and it is also my father's yahrzeit. So I'll talk about my father's teachings that are relevant to contemporary politics when he was a student of political science in the University of Vienna, 10 years before the Germans took over, and what he was seeing going on. So we'll talk about that too. So now to go to the Rambam, I'm going to go back to my share screen. And now, okay. Move this out of the way. We're going to look at the Rambam now as the great philosopher of Jewish law. And it's not just philosopher of philosophy, but philosopher of Jewish law. And no way better to understand the impact of him being than to look at the way other people in the world have looked at him by issuing stamps. Didn't think about it. You know, I figured Israel certainly would have a stamp in his honor. And here's an example of a stamp. Israel, it says it's like a commemorative stamp rather than a postage stamp. No amount on it. It's the Congress Habenlaumi LeToldot Hamada, the International Congress for Science Studies, the history of science. And so for this International Congress, Rambam was the theme. Okay. Well, how about the Grenadines, which is it was the little island that President Reagan invaded, Grenadines, in the Caribbean. Well, on the 40th anniversary of the United Nations, 1985, it also coincided with the 850th anniversary of the birth of Maimonides and the World Health Organization. They put the stamp of the World Health Organization together with the picture of the Rambam as their stamp. All right, very appropriate. Where did I go? Oh, there we go. And then here, Lesotho, in the same period, also 40th anniversary of the United Nations, also put Maimonides, again, because it was his 850th birthday, or presumed birthday, nobody can tell exactly, and put his picture. And again, a picture of the United Nations symbol together with it. Very, very appropriate. And then we go to Sierra Leone, country in West Africa, and issued what we call a collector's plate, stamped with the Rambam, and in the footsteps of Maimonides, and here a copy in the background from Fez to Cordoba, Fez, Cairo to Jerusalem, because that's where by tradition he ended up and then was buried in Tveria. This one from Dominica, again, the Caribbean, with a quotation from Maimonides. May peace be with you and with the other scholars and all the common people. All right, beautiful prayer from Maimonides. I'm not sure where that's taken from, but they put a picture here of a Jewish scholar with a scroll on his laps. We can down his lap. And then we go ahead here. Micronesia. Micronesia, very small. It's a chain of very tiny islands in the South Pacific, north of Australia, north of New Guinea and Papua. Again, on the occasion, I guess, 1138, the birth, using 1138 as the date, and on that occasion marking it. Further down on this list, the Republic of Guinea, also a country in West Africa, showing a picture of the Rambam, a picture of Jews leaving in exile. The gates, Cordova, the gate of the Jewish quarter. And interesting that they show this looks like Jewish refugees, exiles, because Rambam was exiled out of Cordova. They had to flee. And finally, the last one, Mozambique. Rambam, this one from 2009, and there's some kind of notation I cannot make out, commemoration of something. A picture, imaginative picture with a copy of what may have been an illustrated manuscript from one of his works, just the letter Aleph I can make out here. All right, just as I say, what better tribute than seeing that stamps are issued in the name of someone who lived so long ago and still his writings have an impact till today. Little other historic aside, in Jewish circles, Rambam has always been a controversial figure. So I look at my wife's family, they're from Yemen. And the Rambam was very close, or let's say the Jews of Yemen were very close to the Rambam. They had gone through a period of suffering where, like in Spain, they had come under the rule of an oppressive regime. A Shiite regime had taken over. The Shiites are always generally tougher towards Jews than were the Sunni. You certainly see that in Iran today. And well, not everywhere, but it was certainly in Yemen. And so they felt oppressed, and at the same time, someone arose who claimed to be the Messiah. And so they wrote to the Rambam, he says, please give us guidance. And he opens up a beautiful letter, magnificent letter, in which he says, you are a wise and knowledgeable community. You have preserved for us ancient records, right? They were known as preserving documents. They had that tradition and reputation. So, and he tells them, this is not the Messiah, you stand strong and steadfast, and it helped the community survive. So they adopted his teachings, and they made him their rabbi. Centuries later, the Jewish community began to be influenced by the Kabbalists of Safed and started adopting Sephardic traditions from the Shulchan Aruch. And so one of my wife's ancestors at that time, in the 1600s, known as Maharitz, the Rabbi Yechia Saleh, pardon my typing, mistyped there, Salih established the Mishneh Torah, reestablished it as the authority for the Yemenite Jews, and reestablished the traditional prayer book of the Yemenites, which was based on the guidance of the Mishneh Torah as the authoritative prayer book. And then Kabbalah kept on as an influence. And just as in East Europe, the great rabbis recognized that the Kabbalah was leading Jews astray. We like Kabbalah today, very popular, but we forget that it had blinded Jews to progress, and basically threw Jews on the basis of emotion rather than reason. As one of the drawbacks in Hasidism, as much as I like it, because it roots itself in Kabbalah. And going back 2 centuries ago in Europe, and also in the Eastern Europe, in the Mizrahi communities, Arabic and Muslim communities, also recognition we have to return to the rational roots of Judaism. So, as my wife's uncle's grandfather is a man who starts a revolution in Yemen, as Rabbi Kafich, denounced the Zohar as a forgery. He's the first man to in modern times to write a systematic attack on the Zohar as a forgery. It's been later on supported by later research. Reintroduced the primacy of the Rambam in Halakha for the Yemenite Jews, and brought into Yemen the study of modern science. Students in his day would learn geometry, math, science, basis of science. Right? That was the revolution. Now, it was a bitter fight. The other rabbis tried to have him put under cherem. They wrote to Rav Kook in Israel, says, stop this man. And Rav Kook in Israel said, no, this is a legitimate position. You cannot try to condemn him. So till today, some Jews don't talk to each other from that among Yemenite Jews. Well, that's nothing new. Well, let's go to his foundations as a scholar of Halakha. He opens his Mishneh Torah. I talked about it, that he's going to make a completely different approach, right? Marcel asked a question about organization. Jews operated in thinking on a casuistic basis. Give me a case, and I'll expand it. From the expansion of the case, I'll come to my conclusion. Rather, he is now going to a codex base. I'm going to set things in a systematic policy. Then out of the system, we can derive our specific cases. So here's the first one, to create a theology of halakha. also. Till then, theology and midrash had always been separated and studied separately from halacha. Halacha is very specific and precise, whereas our thinking style is wide open, wild. That's the way we like it as Jews. He wants to bring the two together, and he is an Aristotelian in his thinking, and logic has to guide us. So he's the first one to create an opening of Jewish law on the basis of faith. So it starts, the foundation of all foundations, the firmest pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a first being. Right? This is Aristotelian, first being. He caused all beings to be, and all beings from heaven and earth from between them could not be saved for the truth of his own being. Right? It is out of this prime mover that all else exists. Because if we think backwards, every action is a result of another action. Going back and back and back, well, there has to be the first mover that initiates that first action, and that is, by definition, God. So that is that kind of Greek thing. Thus, supposing is not, none else could have been called into existence. If there was no God, there would be nothing. Because all existence has to be grounded in something, so that something is God. Conversely, though, supposing all other beings, say if he alone were non-existent, his being alone remains, right? So God exists not dependent on the material universe. If nothing else was, God would be. He does not cease to be because of non-existence. All beings dependent upon him. He, blessed is he, not dependent upon them, single one of them. The truth of his being, incomparable truth of any other individual being, right? This is a foundation of all truths. Later, I guess, a philosopher like Sartre would use the term of God. It's an entity in itself, of itself, completely self-sufficient and aware of its own existence, as opposed to the human being, which is of himself, aware of himself, and matter, which is of itself but not aware of itself. Right? That's and so here, modern philosopher really following on the kind of philosophical thread of thought. And none like unto him, no other true being besides like unto him. Notice now he's taking a philosophical thread and making it a foundation of Jewish law. Then he goes on the idea, and again, this is going from pre-Newtonian physics. Being is the God of the universe who guides the spheres with an infinite force, right? Again, we think back to the structure of the universe, shells around shells around shells, right? Now, we do know now that if we go to the subatomic for structure, it is shells upon shells upon shells. It is the foundation of matter. But in the Ptolemaic universe, it's the Earth at the center and shells around it. But these shells of spheres move constantly. Constant motion is impossible without the force moving it. And God would be the force that moves it. In other words, God, again, what the medievals would say, causa in fere. There's causa in esse, that's the creating cause. Causa in fere is the cause that makes things continue. Now, we know from Newton that that's no longer accepted, but this would be, again, applying physics, the Rambam, to halacha. So with this, then, belief is a mitzvah, right? You must, it's a command. From the 10 Commandments that we read last week, the opening line says, I am the Lord your God, right? We understand it as a preamble. He says, no, it is a command, right? Whoever supposes there's another God violates a prohibitive commandment because it says no other gods and is an atheist, denying the great principle and everything else depends on. All right, and then following in is halacha. You can see. This is the English translation to the Hebrew. The Hebrew is very clean, but very tight Hebrew. So the English is trying to keep that tightness and terseness, right? So you must assume the logical necessity of one incorporeal God, right? God is one, neither two nor more than two. Oh, who's he putting him on the spot now? Neither two would be Zoroastrian thinking, Mandean thinking, Manichaean thinking. There are two forces of the universe, force of light, force of darkness, force of good, force of evil, force of God, force of Satan. No, there is no such two forces, no more than two, which would put out the idea of Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Nor more than three or four, which would be polytheism, right? But one whose unity, there's no comparison among the individual universe. This idea of one, when it says Shema Yisrael, God is one, and he refers to that, it is not a mathematical entity of one. It's got to be different from any other concept of one. Not like the unit of a genus, which embraces many of it, right? You call it like dogs. There's a group. They all are a bunch of dogs. Each one is the individual. That's a group, genus. No, this would not be a group of gods, like the gods, which is the way the ancients would talk about all the forces of God in the universe, the gods. No, as a collective. No, not a collective. Nor the unit of a body, which is divisible into parts and particles, right? The Rambam will attack the idea that those who would say, my hand, God speaks, my hand, my right arm, these are merely figures of speech, not an actual entity. To us, we assume that's true, but in the ancient times, it was not obvious. Rambam is making it obvious. The rabbis in the Midrash begin to make it obvious. Some of the prophets make it obvious, but not everybody understood it as such. Supposing that there are many deities is equivalent to an admission that they are corporeal. Because if you have many deities, they have to have distinctions between them. If you have a distinction, there's a demarcation. So then there has to be a material divide between them. If there's a Zeus and the Hera and Juno and Venus, there has to be demarcations between them. You've given them physicality. You've limited them. So if you suppose the creator to be corporeal and material would force conclusion, he is finite. Well, if God is a body, then he's finite. He has a limit. Because all things corporeal have an extension and a limit. But God would be infinite and uninterrupted. And in truth, the universe functions forever. The universe functions forever as an output of God, which is endless. So power is positively not a physical power, right? Even that which we call power of God is nothing from the physical universe. Not like heat, light, gravity. And because incorporeal, none of the chance traits of bodies, so as to be divisible or an offshoot of something else, can be attributed to him. This is, by the way, I'm not sure if he's thinking of it this sense. He knows, he's familiar with some of these thinkings that become part of Kabbalistic thought. The idea that you have emanations out of God that have different functions. It's also Neoplatonic thinking. It is Gnostic thinking. No, you cannot have that either. So the idea of the Esser-Sphirot in Rambam's thinking would be a violation. All right? Would be a violation because we're trying to attach entities to God that cannot be attached. So therefore, it's impossible to be but one, and the command is from Shema, right? You know, right? So here he's teaching us. Okay. What we're going to do is use science. We're going to go back to science. Right? You want the truth is in the science. And he goes to the science of his day. It's a Ptolemaic science, right? Not Copernican or Galilean, but we got it here. Celestial spheres called heaven, firmament, habitation, nebulae. And it talks about 9 spheres, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, and so on. All of the controlling spheres, the sphere is transparent, right? This is, again, he's using science of his day. Some are small stars, Earth is bigger. Some are large stars, bigger than the Earth, right? They're able to take some measurements. The Earth is bigger than the moon about 40 times. It's not, it's about only 4 times. But again, he's trying to use measurements using the equipment that is known in his day. Sun is bigger than the Earth 170 times. There, apparently, he's not so far off in the count. And consequently, the moon is approximately 1/68,000th part of the sun by that math. All right, it's not that smaller, but it's smaller, right? So among the stars, no star bigger than the sun, none smaller than the star in the second sphere. It would be Mercury, it would be the smallest of the stars, at least of this universe as he knows it in his day. Okay. Not bad, given that he's relying not on his onus. He's relying on what is known science of his day. And then a Pythagorean element in it. All the stars and spheres are beings endowed with a soul, intelligence, understanding. Right? Pythagoras was one of the famous ones who said that the heavenly elements all are engaged in. There's a song in the universe. There's music in the universe, right? There's an intelligence in even the universal forces have an intelligence, and their function to whatever their purpose is, right? The angels, the spheres, then the human. Again, here going from the Greeks, the elements, right? 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. That's Aristotle, maybe others also. But basically, when I say these, we're talking modern forms of fire is the heat, light energy. Air is all gases. Water would be liquids. Earth would be solids, right? Those are the basic forms of matter plus energy. Those are the elements of all creatures beneath the expanse, man, beast, fowl, right? We all, minerals, precious structures, we all are part of that same basic elements of the universe. All bodies, okay. All the bodies are joint matter and form. This is out of medieval philosophy. All things are extension and matter, right? So everything there is a combination of these 4 elements. All right, it's again, he's relying on the science of his day that we're going to operate. And now, what's important, he's breaking us again away from magical thinking. It's the nature of, and to some extent also away from miraculous thinking. He's telling us not to expect miracles. Why? It's the nature of fire and air to go up from the center of the earth towards the center, nature of water and earth to go below towards the center, not due to intelligence, not due to desire, but to a rule fixed in them and to nature which was engendered in them. The rabbis in the Midrash, the Talmudic period, and Mishnah period already understand this. They make reference to this, that Olam K'Nogo Noheg. There are certain policies upon which the universe operates. But he is now making it very explicit. Do not expect up to be down, down to be up. All right? And because there are elements for all bodies, it's found each and every body, whether man, beast, animal, fowl, plant, and so on, is uniform matter, unformed matter, a fusion of water, fire, air, water, and earth. All that exists is a fusion of these entities, and therefore operates under the laws of nature. Very important. Don't expect things to suddenly happen out of order. Right? So he's giving us faith, theology. Okay.
You can answer this or read them. We have the same dates that we got you last.
Hold on. Okay. There we go. Okay. He's a physician and a psychologist. So he goes on to discuss human behavior, individual and social behavior, medicine and psychology, and the freedom of the individual to make choices of good or evil, and emphasizes the need to attain what's called the middle path. We talk about this Shvila Zahav in modern Hebrew, golden mean, it's taken from Greeks also. Shvila Emtsai, the middle path. So, what makes us behave as we behave? To the physically sick, the bitter tastes sweet, and the sweet tastes bitter. Among the sick, there may be one who craves and desires food which is unfit for consumption, for example, dirt and coal. We've seen that. We know this in psychology, that people will eat and grab dirt as a compulsion, and despises good food such as bread and meat, or they go and eat junk food like Twinkies all day, right? According to the seriousness of the disease. Even so are people whose souls are sick, right? So from the physical example of human behavior with eating, he goes to other actions of psychology. People's souls are sick, people who have obsessions, compulsions, psychotic episodes. They desire and love the evil tendencies and hate the good way and are lazy to follow it, for it becomes a very heavy load upon them in proportion to their ailment. So in other words, they're fighting these dispositions. It is easier to give in than to fight it. So says Isaiah of these people, woe to those who say that of the evil it is good and the good is evil. Put darkness for light and light for darkness. Put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. And respecting their like, it says, who leave the path of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness. In other words, that the tendency of the human to commit sins is a consequence of an imbalance, psychological imbalance, and you have to fight that imbalance. So what's the corrective measure for the sick soul, for the soul sick? Let them go to wise doctors of the souls, and they'll heal the disease with tendencies wherein they will instruct until they bring them back to the right way. They that are conscious of the evil and tendencies and do not go to the wise to be cured by them, of them said Solomon, wisdom and instruction of fools alone despise. Another, you have a tendency to something that's destructive, ruinous to yourself, ruinous to others. You by yourself may not be able to deal with it, but you know that there's someone you can go to. If you refuse to go, then you're liable, right? You need someone to work with you, right? He's telling people, you go to the shrink, go to your rabbi. Don't just sit there and continue in the destructive path. And his approach, those of you who study psychology, one of the great figures in psychology of the last century was B.F. Skinner, who went from Pavlov's dogs and went the other way around. It's called behavioral conditioning, where I can shape your behavior by conditioning you with reward and punishment. It's not as all-encompassing anymore today, but certainly still a very important factor in therapy. So, but this, Franklin does the same thing, Benjamin Franklin, well, he's centuries before them. How may the cure be? He who is of a hot temperament should be taught to demean himself this wise. If he be smitten and cursed, he must not feel the insult at all. In other words, if you're hot-tempered, somebody insults you, you want to hit him, accept the insult and keep on doing this. And eventually anger will be rooted out from his heart. He who is arrogant should accustom himself to a life of extreme self-abasement. In other words, if you are the snob, try dressing like the poor person and living like the poor person, feel the shame that they feel, and you will get that snobbery or that haughtiness out of you. What will happen in both of them is they'll find a balance. Return to the middle way, you'll find it through your lifetime. And this you should follow in all the rest of tendencies. If you went to the extreme of one point, remove to the extreme of the other, then follow it up a long time to come to the middle, right? So I think like in treatment of any addiction, from one addiction we go to the opposite completely before we try to rebalance. So on, he goes on and on with the law codes, the usual things that we know, Shabbat, holidays, kashrut, male-female relations. He's now going to go a step further. He's preparing a constitution for the future. And he builds up civil laws and criminal laws. He builds up laws of sacrifice and purity for the temple. He actually gives instructions what should be done in the temple because he's expecting it in his day. He's a good Jew. Every Jew expects it right in his day. And then if that's the case, a king and a Jewish polity need laws of government. So he goes and he wraps up his the Mishneh Torah, the laws of kings and the laws of government. Right? He's in the style of Plato, the philosopher king. The enlightened king, he knows the teachings of the Torah, knows the religion. He's going to rule with a strong hand to make sure the country is operating correctly. He's not an easy-go-lucky type. Right? So, but what happens? The king Messiah will arise and reestablish the monarchy of David as it was in former times. Rebuild the sanctuary, gather in the dispersed of Israel. These are explicit in the Torah and said by all the prophets. Now, how do we know who is the Messiah? If a king arrives from the house of David, versed in Torah, engages in commandments, as David his father, with written and oral Torah, and enjoins all of Israel to follow his ways and encourages them to breach his breaches and fights the wars of God, that he defends Israel, that may be the Messiah. That's how you know. If he succeeds and he defeats the enemies around, builds a sanctuary in his place and gathers the person of it, he definitely the Messiah. What does that mean? Anybody else who says he's the Messiah, if that has not happened, that's not the Messiah for Jews. Right? That is a denial of Christianity in that. It's a denial also of Islam, of any other. But if it does not succeed and he's killed, maybe he was not the true one. He may have been a good king, but things go on Some of the wise will stumble. Its time is yet appointed. It takes from Daniel. Right? Right? We made a mistake. He's not the right one. That's how we know. Truth. The proof is in the pudding, in the history. So now, what about Christianity and Islam? He does not like either. What's happening in his lifetime? Christians and Muslims are battling each other to the death in the land of Israel over who rules Jerusalem. So he's sitting as a Jew. He's looking at both of them. And he's not very favorable to it, right? He had to run away from Spain because of Muslim extremists. He knows the Jews in Europe were being attacked by Christians. So I don't think he has any reason to be especially open-minded. But he says this, all the doings of Jesus the Nazarene and that of that Ishmaelite, they won't say Muhammad, the Ishmaelite, other places says Hamishuga, the crazy one. And I would not want to share that with my Muslim friends, but that's the word he uses. Comes after him, nothing but to pave the way for the King Messiah. In other words, their function is to open the world to the Messiah. That's why they're there. When they realize that Messiahs were false, they will abandon him and turn to God's true Messiah. And he says, look at this. Look at the world is now already filled with matters of the Messiah and matters of the Torah and matters of the commandments. Right? Islam also has the idea of the Messiah, return, Mahdi, an ultimate end of days. Islam has it also. Christianity, looking for the return of Jesus, right? And he says they're discussing issues that were issues of the Torah and issues of the commandment. Knowledge of these matters have spread to the distant islands and the many nations of those with uncircumcised hearts. Look what's happening to people. It's not there yet, but this is important. When the true Messiah will rise and succeed, he will be lifted up and raised aloft. They will all immediately return and will know that their fathers left them an erroneous legacy and their fathers and prophets led them astray. Okay? When we get the real one up, they'll know we were right. Okay. What about miracles? Is the Messiah supposed to bring miracles? No great miracles. When someone says, oh, this is the Messiah because there are miracles, says, no, the laws and statutes of the Torah never change, may not add nor detract from them. And then he says, what about the wolf lie with the lamb, the sheep and the leopard with the kid? That's a parable, he says. That is, remember, just a metaphor for the nations of the world around us. Everything that was written about the Messiah are parables, so do not look for any miraculous events to come with the era of the Messiah. It's just, that's what's going to happen. It will be a change of the political structure of the world. Basically, and he's quoting the rabbis, "Ein ben olam hazeh lo yemot HaMashiach, ela shibud galiyot." There's no difference between this world and the days of the Messiah, except the subjection by the Jews to the rule of the nations of the world. That ends. Jews are independent. That is the definition of a messianic era. So in some sense, we are seeing it. Is it a messianic era? Well, if it continues, then it is. If it doesn't, we were led astray. But that's how we will test. So finally, he wraps up. He says, well, what is all of this about? Why this whole idea of a reign, of a messianic period? Why with at all have a return of the children of Israel to the land of Israel under a Davidic king, under a restoration of a temple? What is that for? And so he comes up with the last chapter. He says, the sages and prophets did not long for the days of the Messiah because they wanted to rule the world, because they wanted to have dominion over the non-Jews, or because they wanted the nations to exalt them, because they wanted to eat and drink and be merry. In other words, this is not for the rule of the super race. This is not for the rule of the Obermensch, right? No, it's not for that. It is not to rule the nations of the world. It is rather desired they should have time for Torah and wisdom. It is to create an entity that would be left alone. No one would oppress them or force them to be idle from Torah, and in this order they may merit the world to come. And he talks about the laws of repentance and so on, right? That as a nation, the nation will be worthy of the world to come. And at that time, there'll be no famines, no wars, no envy, and no competition, right? There would be peace. Nations would be able to live in peace. For the good will be very pervasive. All the delicacies will be readily available as thus the world will only, then it goes to the whole world. The world will only be engaged in knowing God, and then they'll be very wise, and they will achieve knowledge of the creators to a higher degree as humanly possible. For it says, for the earth shall be filled with knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea, from the teachings of Yeshayahu Isaiah. And it concludes, blessed be Hashem who helped me. All right, what a magnificent ending. In other words, what are we looking for in all of halacha, in all of our observance? Going from the premise of a faith in one God through a premise that we can take charge of our lives if we do the right actions and treat ourselves, our minds as we treat our bodies healthily, and treat our social body healthily as we do, and then use the halachot and the mitzvot as a way of conditioning us and training us. That's how he's going. Meriting being brought back into our land, creating a polity which then sets an example for humanity, and all humanity then no longer is engaged in warfare or destruction, but in the search of truth, of divine truth. You can't find a greater summation of what it is to be a Jew than in this kind of statement from the Rambam. So I'm going to stop the screen share at this point. Any questions in particular? Been going on and on and on. Okay. So you can see how he's taken, right? Jewish law. Next week, now we'll look how he goes even further. This is for every Jew. So he's setting every Jew as a right-thinking individual guided by knowledge and science and wisdom. In his Mishneh Torah, he's going to go even further to where very few Jews can comfortably stand and sets the foundations for much of what eventually becomes Western civilization, and we'll see how that works, how it happens. Okay, any questions? Okay, and I'm going to call.
It seems that Yigdal kind of summarizes what you have said essentially.
Yeah. So the Yigdal, whoever was the author of Yigdal, took the 13 attributes of faith, the Ani Ma'amin, which was taken by somebody, took from Rambam's discussion in the Mishnah, but 13 principles that a Jew has to hold on to, and summarized it. So when you sing Yigdal, you're singing philosophy. Adon Olam is also the same idea. When you sing Adon Olam, you're singing philosophy. Very much so. Yeah. Okay. So with that, we're going to wish everybody Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Great week.
Thank
and be healthy.
Shabbat
The shots are coming out. It's be patient. They're getting better now. There's going to be a larger supply. They're increasing the 65 and above supply. Right now, they're finishing up the second set of shots. So, it's going to take a little while, another week or so. And I think they're getting better at the distribution. Certainly, and then they're going to start up with people under 65 who have existing health conditions. So I think it's going to be very important for all of us. All right, so be patient. It takes persistence to get through, but you can get it. All right, take care.
Rabbi?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Have you heard the news out of Israel that they've developed a vaccine that has cured?
Yeah, not a vaccine, but treatment. Yeah.
Treatment.
Ichilov Hospital. So they've had very good success rate with it, like 92% success, something like that. So I'm hoping that that will prove verifiable in larger numbers. The numbers out of Israel in terms of the vaccine also are very positive. Notice that the between Pfizer and Moderna, I think they're using more Moderna, but between the two, after the second shot, very effective. The infection rate has been like a percent of a percent, something like that, very small. And also in preventing spread. This was a concern because they knew that it would stop the virus for the person who got the vaccine. It would have stopped that person from being a spreader. Because then it would become actually dangerous, because you'd think, I'm safe, I walk out without a mask, but I'm passing on. And said, no, it shows that while the virus might multiply inside the person, it doesn't multiply enough to actually exist in the nasal passages and the lung passages to be expelled and passed on to somebody else. And that's the critical point, very critical. So between, we should expect them to see in countries where vaccinations have started significantly, a reduction, both because of vaccine and because of general herd immunity increasing, because that is happening. That is happening. For everyone who's tested, there are 3 who are not tested to have it without symptoms. So the United States should be, we're seeing a reduction. I think you're going to see increasing reduction in the United States, Israel certainly. By the way, India has had a reduction without vaccination, and nobody has figured out why. And the only theory they can have is that India is the average population in India very poor, lives in very poor conditions, that illness is actually a prevalent part of Indian life, and their bodies are used to foreign entities. And so they may actually be more resistant. That's the only theory somebody, right? Very different from other parts of the world, by the way, that have similar poverty rates. So a lot of unknown, but maybe, we're rounding the bend, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, whatever metaphor you want to have. Okay. So that's everybody. Shabbat shalom. Yeah.
Rabbi, sorry.
Yeah.
Carmen has suggested that since we're seeing now that we might start services in the show, she wants to compile everybody should talk about how they cope with the COVID during this year, and send that stories to Carmen, and Carmen will compile that.
Oh, yeah. She was, yes, yeah. She was thinking of doing a newsletter. Right.
To help.
That's we'll have a little journal. That's right. We can share it. We can print it and mail and post it also. Yeah. Good that you brought that up. Yeah. We'll see. Purim we'll still do online, but we'll go from there. Once we know enough people have been vaccinated among our crowd, and we also want to include those who are not in the 65 plus but have medical conditions that they're covered, then we're all going to feel more secure.
Okay, look.
Okay, good Shabbos to everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Thank you,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.